mountains. We gon' walk it out and move mountains. And I'll rise like the day. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, I like the waves. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. You, the silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we would take the world to its feet. Move.
Welcome, everyone that is just joining us. We're going to go ahead and wait just a few more minutes while some folks trickle in. And we'd love to see the diversity of people that join us for these live sessions. And it can be nice to kick off by changing your Zoom view to a gallery view and see some of the beautiful faces here with us. We see some familiar faces. Hi, Casey. Hi, Patrick. Hi, Courtney.
Hey, man. From his office? Okay. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm
Awesome. Well, we're getting a few more trickling in. What do you think, John? Do we want to kick it off?
Sure. Everyone's busy, so let's go. Nice to see everyone. Lots of familiar faces, as Tay said. And I watched Jon Stewart last night, and if Jon Stewart announces himself and introduces himself every night, I suppose I should too. So I'm John Fullerton, and I'm the host of the show. And I'm really delighted that you're all here to hear what we have to say and learn a little bit about this upcoming course. I'm always embarrassed a little to talk about my story, but I'm always told that at least a third of the people here don't know my story. So let me just briefly share who I am and why I'm doing this, so that you have some context about what's coming. My professional career was nearly 20 years on Wall Street. I always refer to the old JP Morgan, very different firm than exists today. And I sort of built a career in the capital markets derivatives world in the late 1980s, 1990s. Very much a participant in creating that world before it turned into a dirty word, which has some lessons for modern technology, I think. And toward the end of my time, I gravitated into the direct investing, private investing, venture capital side of the firm, wanted to learn how to invest. Actually made my first impact investment while still at the firm in 1997, investing in a charter school company. So I've been thinking about this, the future of capitalism, the transformation of capitalism for a long time. But it wasn't until I left the firm that the gravity of this issue really hit me. I happened to be downtown. I left in 2001 in the spring, and literally the first day I was back in New York City was a sunny morning in September where I had a meeting with a different charter school CEO. I was thinking of getting involved in the charter school movement in the United States. And that day happened to be the day that they flew two planes into the Trade Center. And I was downtown and experienced that up close and personal. I came out of the subway right as the second fireball was exploding. And that was a pivot in my life, like many people. But when you experience that so viscerally, it, I think, has a very different effect than if you watch it on TV. And so I got my way home and probably went into a real depression about what the hell's happening in the world. But it caused me to start reading books, as I say, that bankers don't read, philosophy books, spiritual books. And I somehow stumbled upon learning about the environmental crisis. And I read Limits to Growth. And this idea that exponential growth on a finite planet doesn't work, it's in violation of the laws of physics, just hit me like a laser beam. And as a finance guy, I understood that if the economy can't grow exponentially on a finite planet, it was finance and particularly investment that was driving that growth. So it was people like me who were actually the root cause in many ways of what we now call the poly crisis. But that was, 20 plus years ago, well, 20 years ago. So I've been on a mission, on a search, literally since, call it 2005 at the latest, to rethink our economic system and to rethink our financial system and to try to understand how it needs to work, and in particular for this upcoming course, how investment capital needs to flow and not flow if we're to end up with a viable, sustainable economic system. And my search has led me to this idea of living system science. And so everything I look at now is looked at through the lens of how living systems work. And that came from both book learning and experiential learning. I see Ross is here with us today. Ross and I were colleagues on the Savory Institute board for a number of years, and a lot of what I learned was in the context of large landscapes, grassland management. And I've essentially tried to apply those learnings to the bigger economic system and to finance. So it's an ongoing search, an ongoing learning journey. And the courses that we run now with my partners at Capital Institute has been a huge piece of the ongoing learning. I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces back. And, in a nutshell, our theory of change is to build a community which is an island of coherence. Ile Prigogine, sorry, it's a tough name to pronounce, has a great quote. He was a Nobel chemist, and he says, when a system is far from equilibrium, which I would argue it certainly is today, small islands of coherence can shift the entire system. So this is an invitation into our little island of coherence. It's now a couple thousand people strong from over 80 countries, and I hope it's a couple 100,000 strong in a few years' time. So that's my story and my work and my focus. And Tay, shall I now do my little slideshow? Jump right into it, or
Yeah, let's dive
right.
in.
As people who know me know, I talk a lot, so I try to keep myself restrained by having slides. So bear with me. This will take maybe 20, 25 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion. That showing up okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So this is a mini workshop and a preview of this upcoming course on regenerative investment. The context is kind of perfect for this, with all of the controversy and blowback around ESG, what I'll call ESG 1.0. And I've been knowing this moment is coming, not that there'd be blowback, but that we would recognize that we needed to have a much deeper inquiry to think about what sustainable investment actually might mean in reality. And my work, again, for those who know me, I've chosen to pursue the truth as best I can find it, rather than to pursue things that are practically attainable in the near term. And I think that's required me to stand quite alone from the crowd, both the conventional Wall Street crowd for sure, but even the sustainable investment community that's built up over the last 20 years. I've always been sort of the doubting Thomas and I think we need to think about it more deeply. And honestly, that's a lonely path, but it is the path I've chosen to simply hold on to my best understanding of reality and of where truth lies, even at the expense of losing friends and hanging out by myself too much. But I think now, 20 years later, the tide is shifting, and people are becoming increasingly interested in a much deeper inquiry into how to imagine transforming our economic system and transforming our financial system. And the timing for this is kind of interesting. I'm sure you're all aware that Warren Buffett, after 60 years running Berkshire Hathaway, announced his retirement at the annual meeting this year. And Buffett he has to be the greatest investor of all time on so many different parameters. The scale of what he's accomplished, the length of time over which he's accomplished, and the integrity with which he's done it is really stands apart, far, far apart from anyone else I can think of. And yet, he is the consummate capitalist, the consummate owner's owner, the clever, shrewd, I'm sure tough negotiator when he needs to be, simple, plain-spoken person. But also, he has tended to, he's not been an anti-ESG person, but he's resisted the calls for investors to focus on non-financial metrics. He's said that he finds a lot of the reporting a waste of money, and he's not one to waste money. He has a tremendous amount of faith in the managers that run the companies that he owns or owns significant parts in. But ultimately, he's a shrewd capitalist. He knows how what I call the algorithm, the finance algorithm, works. He knows how to deploy capital over the long run in such a way that it compounds the returns to capital. And there's an enigma here, because he apparently drinks 5 Cokes a day, eats McDonald's for breakfast, and seemingly is unconflicted by the fact that his great success comes with the rise of health epidemics in the United States and around the world. And he also owns major stakes in 2 big oil companies. And he acknowledges climate change is real, but he seems to, in a sense, minimize it by saying, well, it's going to happen slowly and businesses will have a chance to adjust. So he's the same skill that's allowed him to be so focused and analytical and effective has somehow created, in my opinion, a blind spot to the non-business, I don't know what the right word is, metaphysical, once in a century, once in a, human experience, consequences of the capital deployment process that essentially pays no attention to legal externalities. And for someone as thoughtful as he is, it's shocking to me that he hasn't become engrossed by this challenge frankly, the way I have and the way many people have. And it's an enigma to me, and I don't understand it. I talk about it as basically an identity issue. But I guess the reason I'm digressing into this is that we have a system that can celebrate greatness in a system that I believe is fundamentally undermining the health on this planet, the health of people, in a way that we somehow allow ourselves to continue. So the challenge to rethink what investment means in this new context of planetary boundaries, rising inequality, grotesque inequality, rising despair, is a huge challenge. And of course, now we're in a kind of a rebound back to, more extreme versions of it because of the politics, particularly in the United States. And I'm emboldened by Indy Johar's recent post, which is titled "We Have Failed. Now Let's Get Serious." And I would say I've been trying to be serious for 20 years, and it's time we get serious. Now, quick comment on the traditional sustainable finance, what we refer to generically as ESG. I've been a critic of it, but I don't suggest that it has no value. I think it's created tremendous value in terms of providing more information for analysts and investors and management teams and boards of directors to use to think about how to manage these enterprises. That has to be a positive thing. And that's very different, though, than suggesting that having that information is going to transform capitalism to a system that's actually sustainable. And then this is one of my favorite little charts. I haven't updated it in a couple of years, but the picture is pretty much the same, other than a recent drop off in ESG assets under management. But the point is that the rise of ESG is perfectly correlated with the continuous rise of carbon emissions. So anyone who thinks that ESG is a solution to the climate crisis, much less all of the other crises we now refer to as the polycrisis, is seriously misleading themselves and others. The problem we have is we've got a system that was designed in a different context, in a different time, when we knew nothing about planetary boundaries, and we had a post-war global population that was less than half of it is today, and was coming off the heels of two horrible world wars in the North, and largely undeveloped in many parts of the South. And so the system that we all got around and developed the Bretton Woods architecture around, it had existed before, but we went full throttle into this free enterprise capitalist system. And by the way, this is not a critique of capitalism versus socialism. This is a critique of neoliberal economics, which is at the heart of both of those systems. It is designed to essentially convert natural capital, beginning with the fossil fuel reserve base that we've been endowed, but also many other forms of natural capital, as well as social capital. And the social capital story is a little more complex because, of course, there's lots of benefits accruing to social capital from the free enterprise system. But as the system matures, increasingly, it becomes extractive to social capital, just as natural capital, in order to continue seeking growth of profits. And we have a system designed to create this relationship you're looking at, which is degrading natural and social capital while financial capital continues to compound. And that's not a static picture. That picture is worse than it was 10 years ago, and it's going to be worse in 10 years than it is today. So we have a system design that's fundamentally unsustainable. There's another problem we have in finance and investment, which dates back or was understood all the way back to Aristotle, where in those days, the Greeks had two different words. They had a word called oikonomia, which of course is the root of the word economics as well as ecology. And it translates roughly into the management of the household. And it's and we expand that to include the real economy. its focus was on concrete and limited use value of money. But the Greeks had another word called crematistics. I discovered this reading Herman Daly late one night on my couch, probably in around 2008 or 7. I never heard of the word, and Daly explained that crematistics is the manipulation of property and wealth so as to maximize short-term monetary exchange value for the owner. And I remember like it was yesterday thinking, oh, that's what we do. We on Wall Street, that's what we do. And yet no one ever gave a name to it like crematistics, and no one ever suggested that there was anything wrong with it. And to the mainstream today, you'd be looked at like a weirdo if you suggested there might be something wrong with this. But interestingly, Aristotle saw the goal of the crematist, unlimited accumulation, as unnatural. And that tells me that he was at least intuitively aligned with a natural living system-based view of the world. And there's other evidence of that. So perhaps Aristotle was, other than our indigenous elders, one of the first Western regenerative economists, even though they didn't use that term. And I've come to see and describe the finance algorithm, which is it's the sum of all of the tools and techniques and metrics and measures, beginning with net present value and internal rate of return, that drives our decision-making around capital flows, particularly investment capital flows. And I've come to describe it as an immune system. And that may seem odd, but one of my teachers, Jude Kirvan, pointed out to me that what an immune system actually technically does is it keeps the system in its current form. It keeps the form from changing. So if the form is healthy, it keeps you healthy. But if the form is unhealthy, it keeps you unhealthy. And I would suggest we have a unsustainable, unhealthy economic system design, an unhealthy, unstable financial system design, and the finance algorithm has kept it locked in place. And I see this as one of the great challenges is how to, in regenerative speak, how we create conditions for health. That's the key to the regenerative paradigm. Rather than setting different goals and different metrics, the goal is more like a farmer, more like a farmer. How do you create conditions for health and rely on the genius of living systems to adapt and adjust and find their way to health? Just like, if you get sick, your body naturally heals itself because it's a living system. But there's another piece of the regenerative paradigm that we spend too little time talking about, which is the importance of removing obstacles. So if you're, again, to use a human health analogy, if you're eating, cheeseburgers for dinner every night and Big Macs for breakfast and drinking 5 Cokes a day, like Warren Buffett has done to age 94, God bless him, there's a massive obstacle to you manifesting your true health. And you can go to the gym and you can do all the things you want. If you don't remove the obstacle, you're not likely to manifest true health unless you're one of the very few lucky ones like Warren Buffett. And this connects to our work here because I truly believe, and I'm not saying this to be hyperbolic or critical, I believe the finance algorithm is the obstacle we need to remove or at least degrade if our economy is going to be allowed to evolve into a much healthier, sustainable system. So in the course, we're not going to just talk about new deals that look like regenerative projects. We're going to talk systemically about how to transition the entire financial system and the investment paradigm from this extractive, degenerative model toward a truly regenerative model. And so we're going to be asking questions that are uncomfortable. We're going to be making assertions that seem impractical, but all of the practical responses that we've tried over the last 20 years have failed. So it's time that we up our game and get serious, as Indy suggested. Those who are familiar with my work and have taken any prior courses know that I anchor the curriculum around these 8 living systems principles. We will do that again in this investment course. Think of these as kind of our North Star. And if you're not familiar with these, we have a short on-demand course that is I think it's in 8 hours. You can get 3 lectures broken down into small parts that'll give you the background to understand what these are about and how we use them. So no need to be worried if you've not taken, for example, the economics course previously, where we spend a lot of time on that. And then what we'll do in the investment course is we will look at this spectrum between conventional and regenerative. This is derived from the famous Bill Reed diagram that many of you will be familiar with. And I've essentially adapted it, not, Bill's context is the built environment. I first adapted it to the economy. And for this course, I've adapted it to investment. And it's a sketch. It's not meant to be taken super literally. But we will be using this as kind of our guide to navigate our way from traditional finance and investment on the left toward the very promising improvements and intentions between ESG and impact investing and green bonds and blended capital, and then all the way into this right range where even the words aren't quite right and the meanings are still in formation, all the way up to the upper right, where I believe that ultimately regenerative investment, it must deal with that 3 mountain problem, which means we must, like all adaptive cycles, and that's the picture you're looking at the top, all adaptive cycles go through a phase of growth and conservation and release, collapse, and reorganization. And somehow we think we can continue compounding financial capital and ignore this essentially law of nature. And so I'm going to very provocatively suggest that we need to somehow enter into a conversation about how we can begin to compost or recycle financial capital back into natural and social capital at large scale. So again, some people may find that completely impractical, unrealistic, and get frustrated. But if I could come up with a solution to the poly crisis that didn't entail that, I wouldn't be suggesting it. I saw this nice little quote as I was fishing around, as I do for any talk I do. A farmer does not grow crops. A farmer creates an environment where crops can grow. In other words, a farmer creates the conditions that allow crops to grow, beginning with the soil. And so my challenge to all of us is, can investors be more like farmers? And the analog might be, an investor doesn't build companies. An investor creates the environment where networks of enterprises and underlying ecosystems thrive in right relationship. That feels like regenerative investment to me. And how that translates into practical action is our collective challenge. And we're going to hear examples of it, and we're going to see that, we're making progress, but there's no perfection yet. The regenerative paradigm is a destination. It doesn't exist on a broad scale yet, but it does appear often hidden in plain sight. So that'll be, I think, the exciting chance to sort of hear from practitioners who are doing this work on the ground and assess, where is this project or enterprise or company on that Bill Reed spectrum, and what could be done to move it further into the regenerative paradigm. So now I get into the commercial for the upcoming course. The course enrollment is open. It's on our website. Tay, I'm sure, will be sharing information in the chat. It begins on June 2nd. It goes for just 4 weeks, twice a week. We decided to break up the finance program into 2 sub pieces, one investment and the other money and banking. So this is the investment piece alone. We talk about money and banking in a different course. The course design has proved to be very popular, and so we stick with it. Why change something that's not broken? It's comprised of a weekly lecture by yours truly. These are intended to stretch us and and help us imagine possibilities that we often don't hear about. We complement that with what we call a discovery dialogue, which is where I bring in an expert in some relevant field. In this case, we're going to have two investors, one working in public markets and one working in private markets. Both of them, I think, at the cutting edge of trying to move into the regenerative paradigm in their respective domains. There's also some previously recorded discovery dialogues that are going to be accessible to you. Very interesting conversations. Again, one from the public market side, one from public and private by Colin Leduc at Generation Asset Management. And then we do what we call practice labs. So we'll rotate, over 4 weeks, there will be 2 live discovery dialogues and 2 practice labs. That was initially missing from the course design, but has proven to be very popular. And here, we break into small groups, and I give you a thoughtful prompt and let you wrestle with it together, and then we share back as a group. And that kind of brings me to the fourth piece, the critical piece of the course design, which is the community. In many ways, as I say, is the curriculum. And one of the one thing that anyone who's been through our courses will tell you, I feel confident saying, is that one of the surprises here is just the amazing people you will meet in a little Zoom 4-person breakout room. There's many businesses that have been started by people who have met in our courses. There's many interesting projects, like a regenerative technology project, that have been initiated by people who have met in these courses. And so simply having this course be an attractor of like-minded people on a similar search that can then wrestle with these very hard challenges and questions together has proven to be invaluable. And it's also critical that, this is not a sort of John is the expert at the front of the class with all the answers. I am more of a tour guide, and I happen to have a background and a context, and I've thought about this so long and so deeply that I can be a provocative tour guide. But the real learning is you all will know much more of where we need to go than any teacher will, and the challenge is to help you see what you probably already know, but maybe in a new way, and then use the diversity of the group to create random connections that spark what I would call regenerative potential. So, for example, I mentioned this regenerative technology project. I never had the idea that there should be such a thing, but the course conversations and the connections there sparked that. And, someone quit their day job and launched the project with a colleague. I mentioned the discovery dialogues. This cohort will have Alexandra Corind, who is it's funny. I met her in Tonic when she was sort of just wandering in, young professional, and she's now been on the Tonic board and now leading an initiative called Twist, which is very focused on systemic impact investing. So that'll be super interesting. And then another colleague I also met at Tonic, Kristen Hull, has been leading a public company impact investment firm, and has embraced the regenerative paradigm actually longer than I realized. So it'll be fascinating to hear how she's trying to operate within the constraints of the public capital markets, which is a serious constraint, and trying to deploy some of these ideas. And the other two are that will be recorded for you. Quickly, the course outcomes. Sorry, this is a little long, but I think it's worth going through. First, to understand what I mean about this finance algorithm, how powerful it is, and how challenging it will be to degrade it. But I want to enlist you all in that challenge. And again, that's not an affront on bankers or Wall Street per se, although I have something to say about that. This is a recognition of the challenge, of a systemic challenge that we collectively need to somehow address. We're going to go beyond ESG while appreciating its important contributions that continue to take place. And we're going to try to move our impact investment from a solutions-oriented mindset to a systems-shifting mindset, and then ultimately to a regenerative mindset in which we seek to unlock unseen potential as opposed to analytically solve problems, whether they're at a company level or a system level. And that's the key. Regenerative potential is the pathway out of the poly crisis, if there is one. We're going to have a session on ownership and governance, lots to say there. And we're going to introduce a concept of non-ergodicity that I suspect most of you don't know about. This kind of blew me away when I learned about it a couple of years ago, and why it's relevant to not just to investors, but to our entire society, particularly as we enter more seriously the poly crisis and chaos gets more volatile. We're going to imagine this idea of a living world in balance with full capital recycling, this point that I referred to earlier, how we move those three mountains back into balance. And as I said, you're going to find friends, I hope lifelong friends and colleagues with shared values from around the world. And critically, you're going to walk out of here with a new sense of agency and a reason for hope in these increasingly troubled times. The curriculum, real brief, 4 weeks, 4 modules, a bit of a review. What's this all about? Make sure we're all grounded in a shared understanding of finance and investment and what's wrong with it. We're going to go deep into understanding ESG and its limitations, and move again on that spectrum all the way out toward regenerative investing. We're going to talk about ownership and governance 1 week, both philosophically. We're going to get clear on what fiduciary duty means and doesn't mean, and then explore some novel structures. There's actually going to be an open discovery dialogue during the course by one of the leaders of the Purpose Trust, so that'll fit in nicely as an augmentation to the course curriculum. And then finally, the kind of more radical ideas that you're not going to hear in any other finance or investment course, non-ergodicity, full capital recycling, and even a bold vision beyond philanthropy, because I think philanthropy needs to be rethought as well in this context. As I mentioned earlier, if you've not taken our regenerative economics course, we have a on-demand course that gives you the fundamentals of living systems and the 8 principles, which we will provide you as part of the package in the course. And I highly recommend you make the time to view that on your own before the course starts. We've attracted some pretty interesting people with some who've been intrigued, to say the least, with what we're up to, and I think this is increasingly becoming the case. I can share a story, but I probably shouldn't because I'm running late. But I feel this in my bones that 10 years ago, I was viewed as sort of a strange former banker working on something that no one really understood, and now I think the time is really ripe for this idea and the rise of this whole regenerative. People refer to it now as the regenerative movement. I'm still not sure. I think it's a movement, but regenerative agriculture is very clearly now on the map, and increasingly people are using the term, even if they don't know what it means in business and in finance, and clearly intrigued to learn more about it. But I can say, based on this last comment, is typical of much of the feedback we get from the courses. You're going to enjoy being with us, and you're going to see the world in a way that is different than when you came into the course. And my hope is that you won't be able to unsee that. And my strategy for impacting the world is to plant seeds in thousands of people who will then do great things that I'll never even know about. Key dates: we start June 2nd for 4 weeks, Mondays and Wednesdays, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It's $700 for the course. If resources are an issue, we do offer scholarships. There'll be information on how you can inform us of that. Enrollment closes the day before we launch. There's always last-minute people. We'd much prefer you enroll earlier rather than later so we can know what to plan on. And finally, my request is to bring a couple friends, because the conversations that need to happen after the lectures and after the sessions are as important as what happens in the course. And if you have some colleagues from work or just friends that you know who might be interested, so you can carry on these conversations, it will be immensely valuable to you. So in closing, well, here's a, I guess from the press release, this is not a new thing that we've felt that we need to go much deeper than the ESG conversation. We even need to push impact investing, even though I'm a big fan of impact investing. I do it myself. But we need to think about not solving problems, but system transformation if we are to navigate successfully the poly crisis. And the flow of investment capital, not speculation, but the flow of real investment capital is absolutely a critical piece of this. And as I said long ago, in response to a question, I'd written a paper called "The Purpose of Capital" before I wrote anything really. And it was at an impact investment conference. And the first question, someone shot up and said, "So John, what is the purpose of capital?" And what I said just off the cuff was, the purpose of capital is to serve life and not the other way around. And I can't say it too much better than that. So that's my story for today. See if I can find my stop share. There it is.
Thank you, John. I hope that was both an insightful overview and sparked some questions or thoughts for people around everything from what we've been hearing and seeing around ESG blowback and what that's kind of been percolating for inside the Capital Institute for a while now in terms of how we've developed regenerative investment. So we'll open up for any questions. If anyone wants to raise their hand with the little raise hand icon, we'd love to bring your voice into the conversation.
I'm just seeing one question here. Everything is recorded. Well, actually, the practice labs don't really. They're group sessions, so they don't really. They're not suitable to be recording. But the lectures and the discovery dialogues are all recorded. So if you miss something, you can easily catch up, and you'll have access to the platform, I think, for the rest of your life, or at least for the rest of the platform's life. So if you miss the entire thing, you can go watch it all on TV when you can.
Mazar, I see your question. How many participants do we typically have in the course? It typically averages around 100 is a typical cohort size, sometimes smaller, sometimes bigger. And then that will sort of vary in terms of who's in live sessions weekly. And then Mary, just to answer your question really quickly, if you miss any of the sessions, that's no problem. We share recordings, so you can catch up with us. Any other questions, thoughts that this sparked for anyone? Sharon.
Not really a question. I just want to say that I'm really excited about this work. You know, I've been an environmental educator since 1993, union member since 1997, climate change educator since 1999, and really seeing that this is the direction that we have got to go in. So I'm very excited about it, very appreciative for it, and just looking forward to deepening my understanding and ability to communicate about this work and to move forward.
Thanks, Sharon. Sharon was a front row student in our recent economics course. Back for more. Hi, Mary. Jump on in.
Yes. Yes. Hi, John. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful to learn about. I follow Michael Schuman, and that's how and the Main Street Journal.
Great.
And I've been working on promoting local investing and sustainable investing in Maine, where I live. So
Oh,
it's
nice.
very, very exciting to find out that you've been doing this work for such a long time. And the transition too, because I've moved into this awareness of the need for transforming our systems. I'm curious. I was appealed. And I've been focusing particularly on the need to transform finance, John, and just thinking it's such a critical thing, and that there's just not the kind of conversation and work going on around it that we need in terms of doing that kind of imaginative thinking of putting out the idea that our systems can function in a really different way and that they need to for people in the planet. So I
Yeah.
appreciate your work very much. And I've got some of my questions answered about the course. I'm curious if you have worked a lot with the people in the Democracy Collaborative and like Marjorie Kelly. Like I've just recently read her book on wealth supremacy, which is so brilliant because I've been promoting B corporations, but I've been feeling like she's speaking so well as somebody who's promoted these positive movements in finance for a long time, but is coming in with this awareness of the sort of the amount of assets and the wealth is sort of concentration and how that's kind of crushing a lot of this stuff, this other good stuff, and that we need to be speaking about the critiquing finance. So I feel like that's what you're doing, and I'm just curious whether your work.
Yeah, I mean, Marjorie is an old friend. I loved her Divine Right of Capital, Democracy Collaborative are old friends. If you were to, there's a lot of overlap, but I'm the guy who's gone full steam into living systems as the design principle, as opposed to my opinions, my politics, my ideology. And there's a lot of, within the Democracy Collaborative, it'd be hard not to describe it as a left-leaning philosophical approach. And, many people would look at me and probably say the same thing, but I'm extremely disciplined about looking to how life works for the answers. And if that tends to be more liberal than conservative, so be it. But, you mentioned Michael Schumann and local economies. That's quite conservative in a certain way, at least depending on what we mean by conservative. And so I try to stay away from the political ideology and seek out the laws and patterns and principles of how life works as the guide. And that's a different paradigm. We're so accustomed to arguing about a left-leaning policy or a right-leaning policy that we automatically put people into a bucket. We just assume they must be.
Right.
And that's a very limiting way to see. In fact, it's blinding. And so I'm off. I've just finished my book that's coming out in the fall, and I talk about two hedges to go over. And the first hedge is sort of realizing that exponential growth on a finite planet doesn't matter or doesn't work. And then there's a whole group of people, largely the ecological economics crowd, over that first hedge. But then there's a second hedge in the distance, which is we can't figure this out through our analytical minds. We need to tap into the genius of the complexity of life, where regenerative potential is not a goal that we set. It's an outcome that emerges from creating the conditions. And it's a radically different way of seeing the world. And I was hugely influenced by Dana Meadows, who pointed out that in her leverage points, that the paradigm is the most powerful leverage point to shift the system. So, at any rate, Michael's a good friend. I appreciate your bringing him up. I need to get him and Marjorie back onto a discovery dialogue. It's a good reminder because they do great work. And Marjorie's, no nonsense cutting down capital is always refreshing. So thanks for that.
That's extremely helpful, John. I really love your sense of not being liberal or conservative. I think so much of this, but instead focusing on the living systems paradigm. I think that's very, very helpful in our world today.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not a Trumper.
Right. I understand.
But I do think, just to maybe expand on this a little bit, Trump's chaos around tariffs is partly well-founded, because the neoliberal strategy on tariffs, or on trade, I should say, was grounded in neoclassical economics, which essentially created trade for the benefit of multinational corporations at the expense of national sovereignty. And it did destroy the middle class, certainly together with technology. And so, these guys have a point. Not that Trump understands it that way, but there's lots to be critiqued about what we think of as mainstream economics. And we do that more in the economics class. And here, we're going to critique a lot about what's mainstream finance, which is just largely extractive speculation. So.
Let me just ask a quick follow-up and then I'll let, and one of the things that appealed to me on your website was your sense that these transitions in economics and finance are supported by wisdom from the world's spiritual and wisdom traditions.
Yeah.
And I've gotten into that world. I direct a local interfaith council, and I feel like there's a real intersection between the sort of interfaith sort of spirituality drawing on the wisdom of all our world's traditions
Totally.
and these transitions in economics. So if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and it's again the same person, Jude Curvan, refers to this as the unitive narrative. She is way hardcore scientist, Einstein level scientist, and she can articulate how our latest understanding of Western science is literally affirming the intuitions of our ancient wisdom traditions that had to be intuitive because we didn't have the techniques then, particularly indigenous, of course, but also, from the Hindu tradition, Neo-Confucianism in particular is very aligned with living systems. And, if you go read Laudato Si, you're going to see the regenerative economy on many of the pages. So it's mind-blowing to me that we live in a moment when, we've thought we were so smart and we were discovering all this new stuff and creating all this progress. And now we've come full circle. It's T.S. Eliot's, after all my exploring to discover the place where for the first time. It's literally happening in our lifetime. And we'll share examples of that in the course.
Oh, that's
and that
exciting.
To me is why it's sort of self-evidently true. It has to be, it's not possible that our indigenous wisdom and our latest science can agree and not be directionally correct when we're doing something radically different and we've got a polycrisis. I mean, it's self-evident to me.
That's right. Oh, I really appreciate your mentioning Laudato Si, because that's the first project I did was kind of an interfaith reading of that book in our community. So thank you so much, John.
Yeah. You'll find, if you read that with my 8 principles, you'll underline 50 sentences that are essentially referring to one of the principles. So, Emily, jump in. Thanks for being patient.
Oh, my pleasure. I just wondered if you could let us know what the title of the book is and if there's a subtitle, sort of get a sense of your, the thesis and
Of
the
my
title
book?
to look for. Yeah.
Well, the publishers get to decide that, and they haven't decided yet. But what I'm positioning it as is the second edition of my original paper. 10 years ago, it's the 10-year anniversary of my original paper that I presented at Yale. It's a long paper, but and so I wanted to have a proper book out on the 10th anniversary, and I think we're going to make it. And the working title is Regenerative Economics: How Universal Patterns and Principles Will Shape the New Economy. So very similar. I called the first one Regenerative Capitalism because I was trying to not lose my friends. But now capitalism has become such a sort of loaded word that I figured it's better to duck it entirely. And so I'll just call it Regenerative Economics. But it'll be New Society Press and probably in the October timeframe, if all goes as planned. By the way, we have another interesting project with a course alum that I did. It's an hour book, meaning a book you can read in an hour. And we've got the first edition, or the first, real books, small edition available now. And it's essentially the essence of regenerative economics boiled down to the least number of pages, the simplest language, to make it accessible, broadly accessible. And I have hang on. I have a whole box full of books. It's a nice little book you can read quite easily. but you can't buy it at Amazon because you can only get it as a gift. And the idea is that if it inspires you, you will then regift it or buy 10 and regift 10. And it's an interesting, gift economy strategy to move this idea through relationships rather than through Amazon into the world. So you'll be hearing more about that as well. We'll have information about it on our website soon. If you're curious, there is an Our Books website, ourbooks.com. And if you want to sponsor 10 or more, you can put an order in. We don't yet have the ability to fulfill individual orders. Just literally hot off the press. And if you know someone who would like to sponsor 1,000, please give us a call. Because what we really want to do is move thousands of these out into the world and then have them circulate. David, again, thank you for being
Hi, John.
patient.
Yeah, no problem. I've been following your work for quite a while, so it's fun to be on this call. So my question is around, I've been fascinated and thrilled by these ideas for a long time, but also at the same time, sort of trapped in the old system as far as employment. So how do
Yeah.
you find companies to work for? I mean, I guess two questions. How do you find, employment and people, like-minded people? And what are some examples of that? Or do you have to go start your own company to be able to work in a regenerative
Yeah.
environment?
It's a great question. It's a difficult question. I guess what I would say a couple things. First of all, long term, my hope is that the Capital Institute certificate of completion of an economics course or a finance course or the In Rhythm course on leadership will become currency as the world awakens to this, and it will open up doors rather than close doors. I'd be lying to say that that's true today, but we have a number of our alums who posted on their LinkedIn profile, and it's starting to, oh, you took the Capital Institute course, so that's one piece, and our vision in the future is that companies will come to our course community just like they go to Harvard to recruit people who have learned this stuff. But that's still future. There are sectors where this is alive and well. Often, it goes under different names, but there's an entire holistic health industry, which is essentially regenerative health. There's an entire regenerative agriculture industry, which is absolutely aligned with this. There's a not quite as massive, but very significant growing real estate development, built environment sector that is embracing and leading these ideas. There's a tourism sector that is quite significantly reaching out around these ideas. And so, and in finance, I mean, there's just off the top of my head, there's two people that started a regenerative investment fund after our course. There's a guy who's converted his AI company to be a holistic, as opposed to reductionist logic AI company. So I don't want to understate the challenge. It's going to be harder to get a job at Procter and Gamble and break this in, but there's also people working inside the Procter and Gambles of the world. Carol Stanford has been working inside, before she passed, Procter and Gamble and Google for a decade, but usually in a little quiet corner, trying to infiltrate. But your point is great. It's particularly challenging, I think, for young people who totally get this, and yet they're in a horrible job culture where they're treated like cogs in a machine, and so it's a real challenge. And I'd love to have our community be helpful in that and share opportunities and help people. But at the end of the day, if you go back to the adaptive cycle, the point of the release is that if you, by analogy, organizations are going to release resources, meaning people, that will reorganize in some new way. And so I think we are facing an enormous new business formation need and opportunity. And that's never easy, but that's what I think is called for.
Mhm. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think that might be a good note to end on. What do you think, John?
Right on time.
That never happens.
Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And if you have questions about the upcoming course or anything else, please reach out to either Tay or myself, or just Capital Institute, communications at Capital Institute. Someone will find that. I haven't been able to catch up with the chat, so if there's anything in there that I've not responded to that someone would like me to before we go, please speak up.
I did have a clarification I wanted to make. John, you encouraged us to bring a couple of friends to the investment course. I just wanted to make sure I understand. Should they be paying the $700, or are they kind of flies on the wall?
Oh no, we've decided to run this as a business, as a social enterprise business, rather than become dependent on philanthropy, which is part of a longer conversation. So we need people to pay to be able to do this, and so, but we don't want people to not do it if resources are a constraint. But I haven't yet. We've been doing this over a couple of years. I've yet to have someone tell us it wasn't worth the money. I'll put it that way. And what they teach you at Harvard for $4,000 a credit, or whatever the hell it is, it needs to be re-engineered anyway. So actually, I shouldn't pick on Harvard. There's actually a regenerative economics course at Harvard now, which is kind of cool. So progress.
And Sharon, as John mentioned earlier, we do have a scholarship program. So financial support is not always guaranteed to everyone, but we do have dedicated funds for that.
And we ask people who can to pay it forward and donate to our scholarship fund, and many people have. We've had one person unsolicited make a $25,000 donation to our scholarship fund after the first investment course, and it's critical for us to be able to do this. So, at any rate,
Awesome.
we'll
Thank
close
you
up.
all.
For those that are new, we always have music at the beginning and the end, so that's part of our shtick, so to speak. So we'll let Tay give us some music as we depart, and have a great day.
You're broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we're gonna walk it out. Ooh.